Awaken your spirit chosen ones. The moment someone tries to control you, they reveal how little control they have over themselves. That sentence alone makes people uncomfortable, and it should. Because control is rarely about strength. It's about fear, dressed up as authority, insecurity wearing confidence, and panic pretending to be leadership. And the moment you don't respond the way they expect, something cracks. Not in you, in them. Here's a fact most people never hear out loud. Control only works on those who secretly doubt their own worth. That's not philosophy, that's human behavior. Every system of manipulation depends on hesitation, emotional access, and the need for approval. Remove those, and the entire structure collapses like cheap furniture assembled without instructions. Loud at first, embarrassing in the end. Chosen ones trigger this collapse without trying, not because they're loud, aggressive, or rebellious, but because they don't bend where bending is expected. They don't rush to explain themselves. They don't panic when pressure is applied. They don't audition for acceptance. And that calm refusal creates a psychological emergency in people who are used to pulling strings. What follows is rarely graceful. Control doesn't disappear quietly. It malfunctions. It leaks. It overreacts. People start acting strange, saying contradictory things, forming weird alliances, rewriting history, and suddenly behaving like detectives with no case and too much time. It's almost funny, in a tragic kind of way, like watching someone aggressively shake a vending machine because it didn't give them what they felt entitled to. This is the rude awakening no one prepares them for. You were never meant to be managed. You weren't built for emotional leash systems, guilt economies, or fear-based hierarchies. And the reactions people have when they discover that? Unfiltered, unsettling, unexpected. Today we're breaking down the surprising reactions people get when they try and fail to control chosen ones. Not the motivational version, not the spiritual fluff, the real psychological aftermath that happens when power meets someone it can't touch. Number 1, they discover you were never confused, you were simply not compliant. One of the most unsettling realizations people have when they try to control you is finding out you were never lost at all. They assumed your calm meant uncertainty, your patience meant hesitation, and your silence meant ignorance. In their minds, you were just taking time to catch up. What they didn't understand is that you were already ahead. You just weren't interested in following their lead. Control relies heavily on misreading people. When someone believes you don't know what you're doing, they feel entitled to guide, correct, manage, and steer you. They talk slower. They over-explain. They give unsolicited advice wrapped in concern. They position themselves as the adult in the room. But the shock hits when you don't move in the direction they planned for you, not because you didn't hear them, but because you heard everything and declined. The moment this becomes clear, the tone changes. Confusion turns into irritation. Helpfulness turns into pressure. What they called support quietly reveals itself as expectation. They begin repeating themselves, raising their voice slightly, emphasizing words that don't need emphasis. That's not authority. That's panic starting to leak out. What truly rattles them is realizing you made your decisions early. You assessed their intentions, noticed the patterns, and chose your own path before they finished explaining theirs. Their influence expired before it ever activated, and nothing offends a controlling person more than discovering their guidance was never requested. This realization forces them to confront something uncomfortable. You didn't need saving, directing, or correcting. You were simply exercising choice, and choice is dangerous to anyone who benefits from obedience. From that point on, their behavior becomes inconsistent. They may accuse you of being stubborn, arrogant, or difficult. Not because you changed, but because their original assumption was wrong. You weren't confused, you were self-directed, and that quiet independence strips them of the role they assigned themselves in your life. That's the rude awakening, not losing control over you, but realizing they never had it to begin with. Number 2, their authority collapses faster than their confidence. When someone tries to control a chosen one, the first thing that silently breaks is their sense of authority. At first, they act confident, projecting power like it's a built-in accessory. They talk with certainty, set rules, and expect compliance. But the second you don't follow their script, all that authority starts to crumble, faster than they can even notice. What they thought was respect was always conditional, built on fear, manipulation, or your willingness to play along. Remove that, and the whole structure collapses under the weight of its own fragility. The collapse is almost imperceptible at first. A subtle hesitation, a repeated instruction, a slightly louder tone. These small cracks are the beginnings of panic disguised as authority. They realize that their usual tools, pressure, guilt, intimidation, don't work. The louder they try to assert dominance, the weaker they look. Their confidence, which they relied on to convince others and themselves that they were in control, starts to look like overcompensation. And as it falters, so does the narrative they've been spinning about you, about them, and about the world they thought they ruled. What's fascinating is that this isn't about skill or intelligence. Someone can be brilliant, successful, or charismatic, and still crumble when they meet a person who refuses to be corralled. Authority only exists when it's recognized. If no one buys into it, it evaporates like steam. And when that realization hits them, that their power is an illusion, their behavior becomes erratic, defensive, and sometimes desperate. You might notice repeated attempts to intimidate, frantic explanations, or bizarre attempts to rewrite past interactions to regain footing. It's unintentional theater born from panic, not strategy. The most brutal part is that the collapse is silent, internal, and humiliating. From the outside, they may still try to act composed, but inside, the gears are grinding, self-doubt screaming and ego cracking. Their authority isn't gone because of you. It was always tied to your compliance. And once that link is gone, you don't just survive the attempt to control you. You watch as the whole illusion disintegrates, leaving them exposed, unbalanced, and powerless in the face of your refusal. Number 3. They become obsessed with decoding you instead of managing themselves. When someone tries to control a chosen one and fails, something fascinating happens. They stop focusing on you in any productive way and start fixating on understanding you. It's like their brain hits a glitch. Their mind, which was previously devoted to influence, suddenly becomes a frantic puzzle room trying to figure out what makes you tick. Every word you say, every pause, every decision becomes data to analyze. The irony is brutal. They wanted to manage your actions, but now they're stuck trying to interpret your intentions, habits, and motivations, as if cracking a secret code will give them control after all. This obsession is exhausting to witness. They replay your conversations repeatedly, scrutinize your body language, and overthink every minor detail, hoping to find a flaw or a loophole. The more independent and consistent you are, the more their compulsion grows. They can't accept that there's nothing to fix or correct, because accepting it would mean admitting that their methods failed. Control requires predictability, and you are anything but predictable within their framework. It's not just mental either. It leaks into behavior. They start sending unclear messages, testing boundaries, or creating scenarios to provoke reactions. They ask indirect questions, offer help, disguised as curiosity, and make statements meant to elicit validation. Every action is a desperate experiment to reverse engineer your mind. The obsession is almost theatrical. The same person who once projected authority now appears strangely vulnerable, clinging to the hope that understanding you will somehow restore their lost dominance. The cruel truth is that no amount of decoding can recreate the access they assumed they had. Your independence doesn't bend to their analysis, and every attempt they make only confirms your self-possession. Watching them spin in this loop is both satisfying and instructive. The very thing they tried to control, you, becomes the mirror reflecting how incapable they are of controlling anything beyond their own assumptions. Their fixation is not a victory. It's proof of their failure, loud and obvious, while you move forward untouched and fully aware of the chaos your autonomy creates. Number 4, they realize they can't provoke emotional access to you. One of the most jarring moments for someone trying to control a chosen one is discovering that their usual tools, guilt, anger, flattery, or fear, don't work. They come in expecting reactions, expecting vulnerability, expecting you to bend emotionally like everyone else has. They want access to your feelings because access is power. But the shocking truth hits them fast. You don't offer it. You don't give them entry points, and that leaves them scrambling. They try subtle tactics first. A sharp remark, a hint of criticism, a well-timed compliment. They watch for cracks, for hesitation, for a flicker of doubt they can exploit. When nothing comes, their confidence starts to waver. They increase the pressure, push harder, angle conversations to provoke defensive or emotional responses, but the calm remains. Every failed attempt chips away at their composure. This isn't arrogance on your part, it's clarity. You know your worth, you understand your boundaries, and you refuse to be a stage for someone else's ego trip. What's fascinating is how uncomfortable this makes them. Control relies on predictable reactions. It's built on the idea that people will respond the way they expect, that anger will create fear, guilt will create compliance, or charm will create gratitude. When those reactions don't appear, the entire blueprint collapses. Their mind starts racing, trying to analyze why their usual tactics aren't working. They might even convince themselves that you're hiding something, that you're playing a long game, or that their timing is off. But deep down, they know the truth. They simply don't have access to you. This lack of emotional entry is terrifying for them because it exposes their dependence on other people's reactions. It's not about you being untouchable or superior. It's about the brutal fact that their control mechanisms are useless on someone who refuses to participate in their emotional games. And that realization, that they can push, prod, or manipulate and still get nothing, is the kind of rude awakening that leaves a lasting impression, not on you, but entirely on them. Number 5. Their narratives about you start contradicting each other. One of the most disorienting things for someone trying to control a chosen one is watching their own story unravel in real time. When control fails, people instinctively start rewriting the narrative, and in their panic, contradictions multiply. One day, you're difficult, the next you're fragile. One conversation paints you as arrogant, the next claims you're insecure. Their words clash because the original story, the version that justified their control, no longer fits reality. They're trying to explain you to themselves, and in doing so, they expose just how shaky their perception really is. This inconsistency isn't subtle. They'll say one thing to your face and then entirely contradict it to someone else. They'll frame past events differently depending on the audience, hoping that by controlling the story externally, they can regain the control they lost internally. It's a desperate attempt to convince the world and themselves that they're still in charge. But the more they contradict, the more obvious it becomes that the real disruption isn't external, it's within them. What's particularly striking is that they don't realize the contradictions are glaring. In their mind, each version is a necessary adjustment, a patch to cover up their inability to bend reality to their will. They call you unpredictable, but it's not you who's inconsistent. It's the person who assumed you could be molded. Every new version of their story is a confession of failure, an unintentional revelation that they were never in control. At the core of this unraveling is fear. Fear that people will see the cracks. Fear that their influence is collapsing. Fear that the very person they tried to dominate is untouchable. And this fear is broadcast through their erratic narrative, a live demonstration of the chaos they feel when someone refuses to conform. By the time they finish twisting the story into yet another version, the truth is clear. The contradictions are theirs, not yours. And that realization, when it finally hits them, is both humiliating and inescapable. Number 6. They feel exposed without you saying a single revealing thing. One of the most unnerving things for someone trying to control a chosen one is realizing that you can dismantle their composure without ever uttering a word. They expect dialogue, arguments, confessions, or reactions, something tangible to latch onto. What they don't expect is that your mere presence, your calm, your refusal to perform on cue is enough to make them feel completely naked. They start to squirm because the power they thought they held is gone, and there's nothing they can point to or blame in you. The exposure is all theirs. Controllers live in a world where influence is earned through access to other people's vulnerabilities. They manipulate emotions, bend perceptions, and orchestrate behaviors to create their little kingdoms. But when you refuse to participate in their games, you force them to confront themselves. Suddenly, all the subtle tricks, all the carefully calculated pressures, all the rehearsed strategies bounce back on them. Your lack of reaction becomes a mirror showing every insecurity, every overreach, every miscalculation they were hoping to hide. What's fascinating is that this exposure doesn't rely on confrontation. You don't have to argue, defend, or explain anything. Simply existing as someone who is fully aware and unshakable is enough to turn their world upside down. They notice the confidence they lack, the impulsive decisions they regret, and the contradictions in their own behavior. They realize that the very system of control they thought was theirs to wield is fragile, and you have no need to touch it for it to crumble. This silent exposure drives them to overcompensate, sometimes aggressively, sometimes defensively. They try to cover the cracks with explanations, excuses, or even fake charm. But the moment has already passed. They've already seen themselves through your unflinching stance. And that moment is devastating because it's invisible to everyone but them. It leaves them raw, uncomfortable, and scrambling, while you remain untouched, composed, and fully aware that the true chaos exists entirely within the person who tried to control you. Number 7. They try to recruit others against you and fail quietly. One of the most revealing reactions of someone trying to control a chosen one is the desperate attempt to build an army against you. When direct influence doesn't work, they naturally turn to indirect methods, whispering, spreading half-truths, framing narratives, or convincing others to take sides. They assume that if they can't bend you, they can at least surround you with doubt, criticism, or pressure. But what surprises them, and terrifies them silently, is how consistently these attempts fail. The failure isn't loud. It doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It's quiet, almost invisible, but it corrodes their confidence at the core. People they try to manipulate are not as impressionable as they believed. Allies don't bite. Attempts at slander fall flat. Their efforts to isolate you, to create a social pressure cooker, backfire because you don't give them the emotional fuel they need. Their strategy depends entirely on the reactions of others, And when those reactions are absent, the plan collapses in slow motion. What's most infuriating to them is that your integrity and independence have already spoken for themselves. You don't need to defend yourself. You don't need to explain, justify, or argue. Your character precedes their whispers. Their little campaigns expose them more than anyone else. The more they try to recruit, the more their desperation leaks out in awkward comments, mismatched stories, and weak justifications. And every time they attempt it, they silently confront a reality they didn't anticipate. You operate on your own terms, and no social pressure can rewrite that. This quiet failure is a form of psychological humiliation. It forces them to face the fact that their influence is limited, conditional, and dependent on compliance they can no longer secure. The more they try to control the narrative externally, the clearer it becomes internally that they never had the control they assumed. And all the while, you move through their schemes untouched, leaving them to wrestle with the realization that the chosen ones cannot be gathered, coerced, or surrounded. They simply exist beyond the reach of their social manipulations. Number 8. They experience withdrawal-like symptoms when access is denied. When someone who thrives on control loses access to a chosen one, the reaction is rarely logical. It's emotional, restless, and oddly physical. They become uneasy, distracted, and irritable, as if something essential has been taken away. That's because control isn't just a habit for them. It's a source of regulation. Your attention, reactions, explanations, and emotional availability were never just interaction. They were supply. And when that supply is cut off, the body notices before the mind can rationalize it. At first, they don't recognize what's happening. They tell themselves you're being distant, difficult, or dramatic. But beneath those labels is discomfort they can't explain. They check messages more often. They replay interactions. They feel an urge to reinsert themselves into your space, even without a clear reason. This isn't about missing you as a person. It's about losing influence, and influence has an addictive quality when someone bases their identity on it. What makes it worse for them is that the withdrawal isn't dramatic enough to justify action. They can't openly confront you without revealing their dependence, so the symptoms leak out sideways. Passive-aggressive remarks, sudden friendliness, random attempts to check in. The goal isn't connection, it's relief. They're trying to restore a sense of control that once made them feel grounded. The cruel irony is that your absence doesn't harm you the way they expect. You don't spiral, you don't chase closure, you don't seek replacement approval. You stabilize. And that contrast is unsettling. While they feel disoriented, you appear clearer. While they itch for reaction, you're at ease. That imbalance amplifies their discomfort because it exposes how much emotional weight they placed on access to you. This is when they realize something they never intended to learn. Their sense of control was propped up by your participation. Without it, they're left alone with their thoughts, their insecurity, and the emptiness they were distracting themselves from. And there's no quick fix for that. No manipulation works when the door is closed. No strategy soothes the nervous system when the source of regulation is gone. So they sit with the withdrawal, confused and unsettled, while you move on unaffected. And in that silent gap, the truth becomes unavoidable. They needed the control far more than you ever needed the connection. Number 9. They mistake your boundaries for rebellion. One of the most disorienting experiences for someone trying to control a chosen one is seeing clear boundaries as an act of defiance. They expect compliance, flexibility, and a willingness to accommodate their demands. So when you set limits, it doesn't register as self-respect. It registers as rebellion. Every no, every refusal, every line drawn in the sand becomes evidence of your supposed defiance. and they can't understand that the problem isn't you resisting them. It's them expecting obedience where none was ever owed. This misinterpretation triggers a cascade of irrational reactions. They might escalate, trying to push past boundaries, becoming louder, more persuasive, or more insistent. They might attempt to frame your autonomy as stubbornness, arrogance, or ungratefulness. Their mind desperately searches for a justification to maintain their narrative. If you're resisting, there must be something wrong with you, because a person with integrity shouldn't be this hard to bend. The irony is brutal. The very act that demonstrates strength, self-awareness, and clarity is reframed as difficult in their mind. The confusion stems from the fact that they equate control with correctness. Their internal metric for proper behavior is entirely externalized. It depends on your reactions to them, not your own judgment. So when you exercise personal agency, it throws their system into chaos. They see order disrupted, not independence expressed. They read your protection of yourself as a challenge to them, when in reality it's simply a refusal to be complicit in their attempts to dominate. This misreading doesn't just frustrate them, it unsettles them. They feel the loss of influence acutely and often overreact to regain a sense of balance. Their accusations, their pressure, their attempts to provoke a response are all born from panic, not rationality. And while they scramble to reassert themselves, you continue operating on your own terms, unaffected by the distortion of their perception. The truth is clear but impossible for them to admit. Boundaries aren't rebellion, and resistance isn't defiance. They are simply a reflection of your autonomy, a mirror showing that control over you was never an option. And the realization of that, when it finally seeps in, is more destabilizing than any confrontation ever could be. Number 10. They realize intimidation only works on people who doubt themselves. One of the most shocking realizations for someone trying to control a chosen one is that intimidation, threats, and pressure have no effect when they hit a person who is fully grounded. They're used to bending people through fear, guilt, or dominance, assuming that most will cave when confronted with authority or aggression. But with a chosen one, nothing breaks. The usual levers that have always worked suddenly feel useless, leaving them frustrated, confused, and exposed. Intimidation is effective only when it meets hesitation, uncertainty, or self-doubt. Controllers rely on these cracks to assert influence, to twist behavior, to steer decisions. They assume compliance because people who are unsure of themselves are easier to manipulate. But when the person across from them is clear, self-aware, and unmoved by external pressure, the tactics crumble. Every threat lands on a wall of confidence, and every attempt to provoke fear bounces back, leaving them startled at their own impotence. The more they push, the more obvious their weakness becomes. They escalate, thinking louder or more aggressively will force results, but the calm, unwavering response only magnifies the contrast. It's almost comical, a person who thrives on control fumbling because the most basic principle of influence doesn't apply. Their mind starts to race. Why isn't this working? Did I misread them? Am I powerless? And the longer the interaction continues without effect, the more chaotic their internal state becomes. This realization doesn't just humiliate, it destabilizes. They are forced to confront the limits of their power, the fragility of their authority, and the reality that dominance is conditional. Your certainty exposes the truth. Control isn't inherent, it's earned, and it cannot be imposed on someone who already knows their own strength. In that moment, the facade cracks. Their attempts to intimidate reveal their dependence on weakness in others. And you, unmoved and confident, witness the unraveling silently, understanding fully that the power they thought they wielded never existed. They learned a brutal lesson. Intimidation is meaningless when someone doesn't doubt themselves, and that truth is more disarming than any confrontation could ever be. Number 11. They begin projecting their worst traits onto you. One of the most revealing and unsettling reactions when someone tries to control a chosen one is the sudden projection of their own flaws onto you. In their mind, they need a reason to explain why their tactics are failing, and the easiest target is the person resisting them. Suddenly, every accusation they throw your way isn't about reality. It's a mirror reflecting their insecurities, guilt, and selfishness. They accuse you of manipulation, dishonesty, arrogance, or emotional gamesmanship, when in truth, those are precisely the behaviors they are exhibiting. Projection is a defense mechanism, but in this context, it becomes a window into their psyche. They feel powerless, exposed, and frustrated that their attempts at control aren't yielding results. To preserve their self-image, they shift the blame outward, painting you as the problem rather than admitting that their influence has failed. It's almost compulsive. The more you stand firm, the more their accusations intensify. And the more intense the accusations, the more they reveal the very traits they were trying to hide. The ironic part is that this projection often escalates without the target even participating. You don't need to respond or defend yourself. The act of resisting is enough to trigger this psychological unspooling. They will speak in absolutes, exaggerate minor details, and reconstruct events in ways that favor their narrative. Every claim they make about you, every judgment they pass, is really a confession about themselves, hidden under the guise of critique. This process leaves them both agitated and self-conscious. Deep down, they sense the projection is transparent, but admitting it would be an admission of failure, something they are unwilling to do. Meanwhile, you remain untouched, unaffected by their accusations, and increasingly aware that their outbursts are more about them than you. By the end, the chosen one doesn't just resist control. They hold up a mirror, exposing the fragility, insecurities, and contradictions of the person attempting dominance. In projecting their worst traits onto you, they reveal the truth they never wanted anyone else to see. They are the ones struggling, floundering, and failing. Number 12. They lose interest in winning and start wanting explanations. When someone tries to control a chosen one and fails repeatedly, something remarkable happens. The obsession with winning, dominating, or bending you to their will fades, replaced by a desperate need to understand. They shift from strategy to curiosity, from action to analysis. It's as if their entire playbook, threats, manipulation, pressure, charm, no longer matters, and all they can do is figure out why it didn't work. The energy they once spent trying to conquer you now turns inward, into a frantic attempt to decode your mind, your reasoning, and your choices. This shift is revealing and unnerving. They start asking indirect questions, probing comments or casual observations, all in a desperate attempt to get a glimpse behind your calm exterior. It's no longer about asserting dominance, it's about grasping something that refuses to be grasped. You've become an anomaly in their worldview, someone who moves with certainty, refuses to react predictably, and refuses to validate their assumptions. And that makes them obsessively analytical, often to the point of irrationality. The frustration builds because explanations, no matter how thorough, won't give them the control they crave. They want to know why you don't comply, why you remain unshaken, why their influence evaporates, but knowing the answer doesn't restore the power they've lost. Their mind loops endlessly through why questions, imagining patterns, motives, and intentions that simply don't exist in the way they expect. What's most striking is the vulnerability this exposes. Someone who thrived on influence and manipulation now reveals confusion, insecurity, and a lack of self-awareness. They thought victory meant bending others. Instead, they find themselves powerless and perplexed, staring at a person who requires no justification, no permission, and no explanation. In the end, this shift from wanting to win to desperately seeking understanding underscores the futility of control over a chosen one. The chosen one doesn't need to argue or fight. They simply exist as themselves. And that existence is enough to make the controller question everything they believed about power, influence, and the illusion that they ever had authority in the first place. Number 13. They realize you can walk away without emotional debt. One of the most disorienting truths for someone attempting to control a chosen one is realizing that you can leave without a trace of guilt, resentment, or obligation. They assume that influence gives them leverage, that the time, energy, or emotional investment they've spent on you creates a kind of debt that must be repaid. They imagine that every interaction leaves a mark, a reason for you to bend, explain, or justify yourself. But when you walk away untouched, unbothered, and fully aware, it shatters that assumption entirely. This realization is a silent form of power, not yours over them, but theirs over themselves. They can't understand it because they've conditioned themselves to see relationships as transactional. Influence is currency, reactions are interest, and compliance is payment. When you remove yourself from the equation without demanding, justifying, or retaliating, their whole system collapses. Suddenly, the person they thought was indebted to them is free, autonomous, and unconcerned, and that freedom highlights the fragility of their own position. The effect is deeply unsettling. They replay interactions in their mind, trying to pinpoint where leverage should have existed, where emotional hooks were missed. Every conversation, every attempt at control, every push and pull is analyzed, only to reveal that none of it mattered. The absence of drama, of negotiation, or of a call for explanation magnifies their own inadequacies. They realize that control wasn't built into the relationship at all. It was an illusion they maintained for themselves. What's truly shocking for them is that walking away doesn't require confrontation or explanation. You don't need to justify boundaries, call out manipulation, or even engage. Your detachment is complete and self-contained. That leaves them exposed, frustrated, and confronted with the uncomfortable truth. The person they tried to dominate doesn't operate on fear, obligation, or guilt. They operate on choice, clarity, and self-possession. And in that moment, the chosen one doesn't just exit a scenario, they demonstrate a principle controllers rarely understand. Influence is fleeting, but self-determination is permanent. The realization hits hard, leaving them bewildered and powerless, staring at someone who walked away clean while they scramble to make sense of their own irrelevance. Number 14. They learn, too late, that you were never meant to be managed. The most devastating realization for anyone trying to control a chosen one is that you were never built to be managed. Every tactic, every manipulation, every attempt at influence hits an invisible wall, because the foundation they assumed existed was never there. You operate on your own terms, guided by your own rules, priorities, and understanding of yourself. They expect compliance, predictability, and malleability, but none of these apply. The chosen one isn't a puzzle to solve, a project to refine, or a personality to mold. They are a force that exists independently of anyone's design. What makes this truth so destabilizing is the timing. They often don't realize it until they've invested time, energy, and ego into attempts to dominate. At first, they interpret resistance as stubbornness, arrogance, or defiance, all things they believe can eventually be corrected. But slowly, the pattern becomes undeniable. Your decisions don't align with their expectations, your reactions don't feed their narrative, and their influence simply evaporates. No amount of pressure or persuasion changes the fact that you were never intended to be anyone's possession. The psychological impact on them is profound. They start questioning their assumptions, their authority, and even their sense of control over life itself. What they thought was dominance was a mirage, and the longer they cling to it, the more absurd it appears. Their frustration grows, and in its place a kind of awe or envy can emerge because the chosen one's autonomy is absolute, untouchable, and unapologetic. Meanwhile, the chosen one moves forward without hesitation, unburdened by their expectations or attempts at control. No confrontation, no retaliation, no explanations are needed. The truth of independence is enough. And for the controller, the lesson comes too late. Control over a chosen one was never an option, not because of luck or circumstance, but because some people exist outside the frameworks others try to impose. Their realization that they were never in charge is the ultimate rude awakening, leaving them exposed, unsettled, and forever aware of a power they cannot reclaim. The truth is clear. Trying to control a chosen one is not just futile, it's a lesson in humility for anyone who underestimates independence. Every tactic, every manipulation, every attempt to bend, pressure, or intimidate meets the same unwavering resistance. From realizing you were never confused, to seeing authority crumble, to projecting their own flaws onto you, to watching their plans fail quietly. The reactions are as revealing as they are inevitable. Chosen ones operate on clarity, self-possession, and unshakable autonomy. They don't need to prove themselves, justify their actions, or bend to expectations, and that is what makes them untouchable. Those who try to control them experience a cascade of uncomfortable truths. Their influence is conditional, their intimidation meaningless, their narratives inconsistent, and their authority fragile. They scramble, overthink, and even obsess, all while the chosen one moves forward effortlessly, untethered by games, expectations, or emotional debt. Every failed attempt at control exposes more about the controller than the controlled. It's a rude awakening, a mirror showing them that autonomy cannot be negotiated, purchased, or coerced. The beauty of it is simple, yet profound. The chosen one doesn't need to fight, argue, or explain. Their existence, independence, and refusal to participate in manipulation are enough to dismantle control quietly, completely, and permanently. The lesson echoes loud and clear. Influence over a self-directed mind is never earned through force. It is only an illusion until it is shattered. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel to dive deeper into the psychology of power and human behavior. Like the video if it resonated with you, comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with anyone who needs this truth revealed. Understanding the dynamics of control and autonomy isn't just fascinating, it's essential. Stay aware, stay independent, and never let anyone underestimate your power to exist on your own terms. Stay awakened, chosen ones.